Hey everybody, it's Jenny Clark with Solvability, and today is my session of GovCon Summit. We're going to be talking about the GovCon Small Business Growth Model. So I'm going to pop it up if I can find it again. This is something I developed several years ago because I said, there's a formula to growth for small businesses and federal contracting. And if I could develop that, share it with people, and they could see what's possible for them, they might have a better way to grow and be faster in it. So this is what the growth model looks like. It's got 7 stages. And the reason I wanted to point it out is because you get so much advice as a small business that turns out is not good advice for you. And you have to be able to filter out what people are telling you and make your own decisions. As an entrepreneur, you're always trying to say, I really want to follow best practices and what works for everybody else. But you know what? At some point, you have to say, I'm going with my gut on this one because I don't feel like what they're telling me to do makes sense for me and where I want to go. The other part that's so important with this is, where do you want to go anyway? Do you want to be a big company? Do you want to just have something that's going to give you a paycheck for 20 years and maybe you turn it over to a management team? Are you trying to have an impact in a particular area? And let me give you an example of that. I think of my friend Eric Dockwright with Vets to PM. He may or may not be in federal contracting, but he's having huge impact with veteran employment, veteran transition, and his legacy, his impact is more than his business, but he executes that mission through his business. He uses that business as a way to broadcast his mission, to have impact, to bring people through and encourage them to do better. And his business provides him the lifestyle and everything else so he can do that and have bigger impact. So back to the growth model, 7 stages. Why did I say 7 stages? I think it was because when I thought about growth, somebody gave me an example of a 4-square type thing. If you were to stand on the floor on 10-inch tiles and you'd have 2, you'd be in the middle and there's 2 above you and 2 right behind you. So like a little 4-square kind of thing. What they say about is growth strategies for any business is you always want to go to an adjacent square first before you go up to the next one. So this is just like if you were a basketball player and wanted to get better, you don't say, okay, well, today I learned how to dribble, tomorrow I'll be in the NBA. That's not happening. But if you have a strategy to say, today I'm going to exercise my skills, I'm going to learn how to do it, I'm going to broaden my skills, eventually I could be a player at a top level. Just like that, small businesses have to say, where am I now? And where am I going? And I'm thinking of the words of Colonel Russ Barnes, U.S. Air Force retired, who is the strategy guy, Cicero, and you've heard him speak many times. He's part of the book and Game Changers, Growth Model, all of these things. He says strategy is figuring out where you are, where you want to go, where you want to be. So many of the small businesses that I talk to are in the early stages of growth. They're beyond that number 1 startup stage. So let me explain what startup is to me first off. Startup is you decided to form a company, you decided to go into business, and boy, there's almost a year's worth of paperwork moving along that track, maybe even 2 years for some people, just depending on how fast you want to move and if you're quitting your day job or if you're going all in, how you're funding it, what you're doing, and everything else. But startup is you decide you're going to form a company, you pick the name, you start thinking about a logo and business cards and all these little things that are important because it's like, okay, those are small things I can do to get ready. I know I have to do it. Getting your tax ID, getting your articles of incorporation, figuring out how to kind of do all your organizational paperwork and get your bank accounts and things like that. Startup in federal contracting, you mainly want to work with free resources so that you can use something that is available to you. So you're not spending a lot of your own time and energy on things that you have, there are people to do it. When I think about startup resources, I think about the Small Business Administration. The SBA.gov website has a lot on federal contracting, on business in general, but there's an entire section in there on federal contracting. There's also, in every single community, there are things called PTACs, Procurement Technical Assistance Centers, PTAC. And when you need to find them, you can go to aptac, aptac-org, and find them. They're usually affiliated with universities. They're usually run by the states with a combination of state funding and federal funding. The federal funding comes from the Defense Logistics Agency. And those PTACs, their number one job is to be able to show, I helped a small business get a government contract, or I helped a number of them. And so they're very motivated to do that. And different qualities of support that you can get. And there's also a group called GovOlogy, GovOlogy, that you can get access to the GovOlogy portal that you would pay for as an individual company. And most PTACs have access to that and can give it to you. The other thing that PTACs have access to are business counselors, so you can get them to help you write a business plan, a marketing plan, all of that information. You can get them to help you do research. You can attend very inexpensive things, but a lot of you already been through that because you're here at Solvability's GovCon Summit. The next two stages that I really want to talk about are stage 2 and stage 3, because when I was planning this event and organizing, and I said, who probably needs the most growth? There's a lot of money for startup. Everybody gets excited. They talk about 1 million cups. They talk about entrepreneurship. They talk about all of these things, but it gets lonely when you get a little bit into it and there's nobody ask questions. In a way, you might have outgrown a lot of the free resources. Now, you can always go back to PTAC and get more assistance on specific areas, but they kind of like, you took the training, you're on your way, you got to figure it out. Where do you go? You don't want to have to pay for expensive resources like consultants or outsourced or things like that, because there's certain things that you have to learn about your business on your own. So you can decide how you want to run it and what you want to do. And you really can't afford to pay a consultant to tell you that, because they don't really know what you want to do. You've got to be able to develop it. And for me, every step in building a business is about, what do I need to do to get to the next level? Or what do I need to do to solve these 2 or 3 problems that are keeping me from getting to the next level? For example, for me, it's always been, how do I get from being Jenny Clark doing it all to building a team that helps me grow? And this year during COVID, because of COVID, probably, we had to adapt and say, we're going all out on virtual. We can't do GovCon Summit in person. And part of me super relieved not having to think about paying the bill for the meals at the JCC, which has been fabulous. And it was super fun, loved doing it, but I didn't have to worry about all those details because there's always a balancing act. But what I was able to do this year is I reached back to people that have been on my team before and said, Melanie Yerter, will you help me again? Joanne Holbrook, will you help me again? We also had Hong Pineda, who's a Navy spouse in Utah, and Addie Krismian, who is getting a DoD SkillBridge intern. So traction stage for a small business is finding other people that can help you be on your team, because if you can't get out of the business enough to give people activities that they can run for you, you're really a solopreneur instead, or an independent consultant, which I've been all this time, until you get to where you've got people running those processes. And you have to be willing to fail at those, by the way, because failing at them, or just saying, gosh, that was super long and super expensive and super painful, let's find a better way. And somebody will raise their hand and say, Jenny, if you'd shut up, I'll take care of that. And boy, they did. So stage 2 traction, every company goes through this, of the point of, when does the entrepreneur start working on the business and not in the business? When do you see yourself at the point where, oh my gosh, I was able to have somebody help me with that part, so that gave me the bandwidth to do something different. Traction and growth, the reason I'm calling that stage 2 and stage 3 is, as I was putting this event together, I said, who are we missing out on? We know that over 50% of small businesses fail. And I think Eric had a statistic yesterday that 75% of them will be gone in under 10 years. And wow, that's painful to think about how many companies could be successful, but they just don't have the access to the information, or it's too expensive to access that information. So what GovCon Summit and our activities are all about, our community, are saying, how can we give people access to top level information in a different way? And we're really creating, I would say, a coaching and consulting model where you can talk to your peers, you can talk to mentors, you can talk to subject matter experts, you can learn from other thought leaders and really develop what you want. We've had so much excitement over the last couple of days when people will be talking and they'll say, and here's a book that I liked about it. Here's something I read about it. Here's an article. There's so much sharing coming on out of this community. And that's really what's going to take. We've got to help do something to help us all be successful in order to make it so that the small businesses, the growth engines of our economy, can do that. So when I looked around, I said, you know what? The people that are missing out on being successful are the ones that are in that gap between, say, 10 employees where, okay, I got to 10 employees. I got there by pure sweat, blood, sweat, and tears. And I've got this many people that are billable on a project, and they're mostly full-time. And I've got a few people that are helping me on an admin basis. I've got somebody that's maybe doing a little recruiting activity, somebody else maybe a little business development. It's not all 100% on me, but what I want to be able to do is get to where I, as the CEO of the company, become the face of the company, the one that's talking to customers, doing the bulk of the business development, motivating employees, running the main team, setting objectives, and all of that. And to get to 10 employees is the earliest point at which you're going to be able to go, I did it. I got here. Now I've got people that are bringing in the revenue. I've actually created a revenue stream. People are happy doing their jobs, supporting our customers, doing what needs to happen. And I'm not the one that has to do all the proposals, all the works, and the payroll, and balance the checkbook as well. So that's why I said 10 employees is kind of that break point. For most companies at that stage traction, it is 10 or 11 billable people and 1.5 people on admin. And I've seen that ratio stay pretty consistent. If you have a company that has 100 employees, it's going to have 10 or 12 people on admin functions. And some people call that overhead, but business development, recruiting, human resources, accounting, executives, certain level of those things. There's always kind of a standard ratio of that, mainly for the companies I work with, which are companies that are providing services. And by services, I mainly mean you're doing staffing work for the government, where the government said, we've got a project we need help with, and we're pretty much going to ask you to supply us with 10 or 12 people, supervise them, make sure they know what to do, hire, recruit them as staffing, or some people call this butts and seats. Traction. Traction is what we're trying to do, is go from the point where you're doing it all yourself as the executive to the point where you're starting to bring in professional management. Now, here's the deal. I only got 10 employees. I got to keep one hand on the rudder, and I got to watch both directions. And the guy in the last session gave a great example. His name was Michael Sanders. His company was Interactive Global. And the reason he was speaking to us is because he was an Inc. 5000 multi-year winner. And to get to Inc. 5000, by the way, takes about 13 years. And most of the companies at that were 10 or 11 million in sales. And you're thinking, I'm a million and a half. How long will it take me? The analogy he used is, it's kind of like you're a pilot in an airplane and you're not supposed to be running the horizon anymore. You want to be able to look at the controls. The controls, the altimeter, your oil pressure, your airspeed, all of those controls are really about what metrics do you need to run your company. A lot of that's financial data. A lot of it's how many people do we have on board and how many are we trying to hire? What kind of work are we going after? What's my pipeline list? All of those things. So it's really like at 10 or 12 people, you haven't really got those processes in place because you've got payroll, you've got billing, you know how to get work, you know how to do proposals. But the transition point that's going to make the difference is when you can start having enough revenue so you can afford to bring in professional management or incremental or outsource or bring in systems, whatever you need to do. That's that traction. You can see in traction what I wrote in that little blocks was processes and profit, current relationships and current capabilities. When we talk about processes, it's like, hey, my business right now, the 10 or 12 people I've got are basically database analysts or logisticians. They all have these benefits. They all are in a salary range from $60,000 to $90,000. There's a lot of similarity. These are people that are good at doing kind of a lot of different basic tasks, and I can grow off that. But when I grow, what I want to do is go to my existing customer and talk to my existing customers about, hey, how are we doing? What would you like us to do more of? Are there any new contracts coming up that you think we should be learning about? What else should we be doing to improve our service? Are you getting the reports that you want on time? All of those things, asking your customer what they need and making sure you're delivering on it is a big part of that process. And then putting in the processes to make it happen. Another great example is, hey, yeah, you're on a current contract of ours. You've got 8 people. We want to add 3 more. Can you get them on board by Tuesday? And you're like, well, of course I can. And what you want to do is go back to your processes and say, what can I do to speed this up? Because you want to have anything that could be a game changer for you that would differentiate you from the small business on a similar contract just down the hall that's going to take 8 weeks to execute on that. What will differentiate you will be the systems that you might put in place. So you've got a way to pull in resumes, do the interview, get that person approved, get the customer to approve that person in that billet and bring them on board. Because the faster you can do that, the more revenue you can get in. So just think of stage 2 as, how do I systematize what I've already got? I do mention profit, and here's why. Rarely do I talk to a government contractor and say, we're in this business to make a ton of money. Because government contracting, it's not unprofitable, but it's not very profitable either. It's usually 5 to 7% profit before taxes is a good number. And that's just because over the last several years, there's been so much downward pressure on pricing, because there was a trend. There was basically initiatives called lowest price technically acceptable, LPTA. And that meant that if 3 companies submitted bids, they'd open the first envelope and they'd open the second one and the third. They'd put them in order by the price. And then they'd look to see if the lowest price person had a proposal that met the technical requirements. Now they say lowest price technically acceptable is no longer the standard. I don't really believe that. Every time I turn around, somebody said, yeah, they cut us on price. Yeah, they cut us on price. You're going to see that all along. And all you can really do about that is try to move in your business toward things that are less price sensitive, because you've got to have profit in your business in order to have cash flow. One of the biggest challenges for small businesses when you are at that 10 to 50 employee point is getting the money for when you do have a win to bring on those new people. Because what happens is this. Oh my gosh, we just won a contract. You know that one we've been tracking for 12 years? Not 12 years, maybe 12 months, maybe 18 months. But you finally brought that contract in and you go, oh, we've got to bring on 16 people by the end of the month. And maybe you actually have a full month. And maybe the people that you bid on that contract are still available and everything works out easy and you can bring them on board. But here's the deal. Most of the time, you're going to have to run at least 2, maybe 3 payrolls out of your own money before you're going to get paid by the government. So the question is, how are you going to finance that? And so a company that's bigger, that's at 4, 5, 6, or 7, say, hey, just go get a line of credit. And you go to that banker that's been calling you for months saying, we'd love to have your banking business. Boy, we can really do some deal for you. Come on down and talk to me. You have a conversation, and here's what happens. Hi, this is Jenny Clark with Solvability. Hey, we just won a government contract, so we're going to be doubling our payroll. And I do want to talk to you about that line of credit. Jenny, who? What? They don't know who you are. They're not going to remember. You're probably going to have to send them an email and remind them, or maybe they're smart and they'll remember. You know what they're going to say is, well, good, here. Let me send you the link to the application. You go fill out the application, you send that in. Oh, well, you've got to attach your personal financials. You go grab that. Well, we need your latest personal financials. Haven't you filed your tax return? It's April. Surely you have that by now. It's like, well, I filed an extension because of COVID. I don't know what's going on. I have it, but it hasn't gone in yet. Well, we want to see the one you send to the IRS. We're not accepting anything else. So, okay, does it sound like they're trying to help you? Does it sound like you're going to be able to get around your bureaucracy? Maybe you can. The other thing that I see as another disadvantage is if there are 2 or 3 owners in the company, you're going to have personal financials from all of those. And you're saying, well, they're not a 51% owner. It shouldn't matter. Well, guess what? When you're small, all the things that shouldn't matter absolutely do matter. They're also going to say, well, how about you give us your last 2 years financials? You'll say, well, we've only been in business for a year and a half. Oh, well, call us back when you've been around for a while. So what you have to be able to do is have a lot of relationships that you're building early so you don't run into that, or you're going to be in a situation where you're going to have to, get a personal loan, you're going to have to pull down your home equity line of credit or do something else. And, these are all tough things to go through, and you don't want to make those decisions on the fly. You want to be planning for it. But the reason I wrote processes and profit is if you're making profit or your income over the month, what you build out is higher than what you're paying out, then you'll have the cash building up and you'll be okay. But in order for a bank to put you on a line of credit, you're going to have a lot more track record than you think you have, because you're going to find when you're applying for that first line of credit that there's more to it. The other thing I'll recommend is if you get one of those things in the mail that says, we'd love to set you up for a line of credit, it's just a random drop in the mail, I would still sign up for it. And I would, even if you don't use that line of credit, keep it active, pay the $150 fee or whatever it is. Because if you have an existing line of credit, then every once in a while, even if you don't need it, go put some money on it and pay it back, because otherwise they may close the line of credit because you aren't active on it. Or they may say back when you say, well, how about that line of credit I got for $10,000? How about we up it to 100,000? They're not going to do it because they're going to say, oh, well, you haven't drawn on it, so no. The other thing about it, don't evaluate what you're doing in terms of what it costs you, because cost is not the answer. The answer is growth. If you don't have growth, if you can't prove growth, you're never going to be able to get where you want to go. So don't worry about the fees and everything else. Those are not the big part of the business that keeps your company growing. Worry about what is bringing in more revenue and what you're doing. That's that traction stage. I see most companies would be at that traction stage between 10 and 50 employees. Why do I come up with 50? Sometimes it's 25, sometimes it's more. But what I see is during the traction stage, if you are not making progress to go after building out infrastructure, you're going to be hindered, tackled, thrown down by that when you don't have it, because you've got to scale. You've got to put in systems as you scale, and you can't do them all at once. Let me give you an example. I moved last year, the week after COVID. I moved to Atlanta. It was a planned move because I wanted to be here for my grandsons. And it was all great, but I got up here, moved into an apartment I had never seen. I was like, oh my gosh, this is 1,000 square feet, but I had no idea it would be so chopped up and that I'd end up living every day in my living room on a Zoom call. It's so tiny. I have the money to move, but shouldn't, because I've got other stuff I need to spend that money on. And that's how it is in business as well. You don't want to try to move when you're going through other things. And when you're going through these growth processes, you feel like you're drinking from a fire hose, or people will say, oh my gosh, my hair's on fire. There's so much going on. you don't have the bandwidth emotionally, mentally, you may not have the financial bandwidth, and you may just not have the time. You just think about, okay, by the time I show somebody how to do what I'm doing, I can get this thing out and I really just have to do it. And you stay in that mode for a long time. That's what traction feels like. Traction, though, is when you finally go, okay, I'm no longer pedaling my little car with my squirrel feet. I'm now moving forward, and I've got my bikes are in gear and I'm moving forward slowly but steadily. That is traction. 25 to 50 employees. The reason I bring that up is because most of the companies that I'm working with are in services. And when they're in service, they're selling people providing those services. So it's very much a relationship between the person and their pay rate and a billing rate. The reason this is important is I've got to be able to keep up with that person and their pay rate, their labor category, what contract they're on, when that contract starts and ends, when the task order starts and ends. Does their billing rate change? Are they doing an increase? And do I give everybody an increase at the same time? Do I do it on contract year? How do I make that happen? And what is a cycle? So if you think about it, when you got 10 people, you can kind of manage it in your head because they're on salary. They bill the same number of hours every month. You can calculate that in QuickBooks. You can do your billing and all that other stuff in QuickBooks. But it gets a little bit bigger, and your 25 employees, you might have people working on 2 or 3 contracts. Then the whole timekeeping, the whole billing thing increases in complexity. And you don't want to have to have written spreadsheets to keep up with that, because then guess what? You're kind of sticking yourself in the spreadsheet swamp and you can't get out of it easily. And I've even had companies that I talked to that said, I wish you would have called me a little bit earlier because I don't know what I can do, because you've built all these other practices inside spreadsheets. If we try to disconnect them, it'll break. I think we just need to wait until you get a little bit bigger and can afford to go to the next level of systems, which, by the way, you're going to spend 60 to 100,000, 150,000 for those systems. And it's going to take you 6 months at a minimum. And none of that is easy. Okay, enough about that. That was the traction stage, which again, I define as it's probably $500,000 to $5 million. It's probably about 10 to 50 employees. When you go to the growth stage, that's because you just got to the point at the end of traction and you're beginning of growth. You've got some systems in. You've got a pretty consistent team of people. You've got like people that are showing up, doing their work, making you look great. They're impressing the customer. The customer says, hey, I see you're able to do this. What else are you seeing? And actually, you're out there visiting your people on contract, talking to them, because that gets you in the door with your customer, allows you to go talk to them. You even have your program manager on a regular basis say, hey, can you go to the break room and talk to your guy and find out what's coming up? Where can we get some more business? So you kind of get some inside intel because you're working on the contract. You'll be developing a relationship and say, hey, what else is going on? What else could we be bidding on? You're watching the forecast for that agency and saying, you know what, if we're on this team, we could do something with this. Or maybe we need to find out who the prime is when this comes up and we're ready to be a subcontractor instead. So many companies do very, very well as subcontractors because it's a lot easier to be a sub than it is to be a prime, manage the entire relationship. I do see companies being successful if they're hiring people that have already worked in federal contracting, or they've worked in a big company as a federal contracting, as a program manager, as a business developer. That really gives people a head start. So we're here in stage 3 of growth. I marked that as being performance. It's expanding current customers with new capabilities. Here's a great example. Had a company that was a $5 million company, and they won some work with the Department of Commerce. Department of Commerce was a new contract for them, but it was a 5-year contract, and they were one of just 2 or 3 winners. So it's not hugely competitive. Sometimes when these IDIQ, indefinite delivery, indefinite quantity contracts come out, it turns out that there's tons of other people on it, and your odds of winning a task order on that are pretty slim. But this was a good opportunity, a good growth path for them. And so what they found is they were customers of one piece of the Department of Commerce. There's lots of other pieces of that, a lot of different program offices, whatever you want to call them, departments. You can just look at an org chart and say, you know, we're working over here. Maybe you're working at CDC doing global health emergency preparedness management, maybe the learning curriculum, and you realize that you could apply that learning curriculum skills to something that is on a specific program. Maybe it's in Africa. You could do that. That would be expanding what you're doing with new capabilities, because it was just a shift to go from developing a curriculum to bringing in the trainers, for example. And that could be a great way to grow, because whenever you're bringing on revenue producing units, and yes, those are people doing billable work, you're going to be doing well. Stage three challenges are different, because you've got to be thinking, okay, I'm a subcontractor mostly. I feel like I don't have as much control over that work. I would really like to be able to go after prime contracts. I feel like we'll be able to lead this work. We'll be able to do it cheaper and better. And maybe even your prime contractor said, hey, guess what? We think there's some work going to be set aside for small business. We'd love it if you'd go out and find a way to prime this, and we'll back you. We'll be your subcontractor. Those are the kind of things that take some relationship building, some performance, some proof that you're going to get into that situation. That's what people do when they're in growth stage. When you're in growth stage, you start looking on the horizon and say, well, what do I need to do next? People immediately say, do I need to go on a GSA schedule? Well, what kind of work do you want to go after? Are you going after work that's what they use? Do your current customer, if you go talk to your current customer and say, what contracts are you going to be using to go after this work, which is in a related area, but not mine? Find out who the incumbents are, find out if they might be looking for new subcontractors. All of those things are really important, and you can't go off and just spend money searching for these things. One of the biggest points that was made yesterday was when Josh Frank was showing us a model, and you'll have to find him and get him to bring that slide up again if you missed it. I call it the stoplight chart, where he explains how many people waste their time looking on tools instead of developing relationships. And you'll definitely want to have a conversation with Josh about that, because that's what differentiates the small business as a success story from the one that makes it into this growth phase. So many of them can't seem to sustain growth because they don't put in the practices so that they can do it. When I think of stage three, I also think about companies that are saying, okay, do I get on a GSA schedule? Well, why? Who said you should go on a GSA schedule? Do you have a relationship? Do you have a probability of, if you were to get on a GSA schedule, which could take you 6 months to a year and a half, that they're actually going to get you work? The other thing is, when you talk about having a relationship with that agency, do you know several people at that agency, or you just know Bill, and Bill's going to rotate out there in 3 months? Or, oh, you heard he retired? You're starting over in that relationship because that's all you got. Another thing that we talk about is big IDIQs. And right now, the hot ones that people are calling and talking to me about are, there's one called CIOSP4 that's in the IT realm. There's another one I think called Polaris that's a replacement from another one. There's some of these contracts that are, stars 2 or stars 3 or whatever. You got to be able to keep up with the names and the labels and learn about them. Another one that has been around for a long time is Oasis. And that's been around, but when I started calling people, I was naive. I called and said, hey, I heard you're on Oasis. I have a friend that's looking for Oasis. And they said, what pool? What do you mean, what pool? What's a pool? You got to do your homework on all this. And the best way to do your homework is hang out with other people that are in government contracting, so you have a way to share your homework notes or whatever you want to call it. So back to this growth model. During the growth model, your biggest investment will be identifying opportunities to go after, having a business development team that knows how to do it, the cost of developing the proposals, going through the capture process and everything else. It's way more expensive than it used to be, where companies in the past would spend 3 to 5% of their revenue on business development bid and proposal activity. It's now more like 10 to 12%. So what we're saying is the conversion rate's lower, and you've got to make sure that you're creating metrics in your company to give you better success than the average person, or you're not really going to get where you want to go. You're going to spend a lot on recruiting, and here's why. When you're competing at a higher level, they're always looking at who you're bringing on and the qualifications. And even though you should not have to have your contracts people, I wouldn't say your contracts people. A lot of times you're asked to submit resumes to the program office for them to approve. And depending on how extensive the experience requirements or how they wrote the labor categories or how they did it, you're running into situations where you're having to find people with very unique experience and possibly the only ones in the world that can do it. So your recruiting cost is going up. You're having to pay higher fees. It's taking you longer. You're having to go through a longer qualification process, and all of those things drive up expenses. That's my concern about the growth stage is you're doing more business, but it's costing more to do more business. In the previous session that we had with Curtis Taylor and Michael Sanders, he was talking about how you have costs that are bumpy. And we were actually talking specifically about what happened during the COVID response, where there was a bunch of unplanned costs, nothing you could have done about it, but you've got to have a lot of outlays. That happens when people say, well, we were in a building we were renting and now we need more space. It happens when everybody had to be issued laptops to work at home. It's happening as people are having to comply with CMMC and spend more money. They were given an example. I think Michael Sanders said that they had basically spent $38,000, $40,000 to get somebody to come in, and it's over a 60 to 90 day process to get them to their CMMC level, hopefully 3. He said it was a lot like investing in these ISO certifications that you have to have. And he said, you know, something you have to go through. Some people can do it internally. Some people have to have it external. It's going to be disproportional investment to your business. And that's why it bothers me. You're having to spend a chunk of cost right now that you don't know how you're going to recover in future rates, because if you can't maintain your growth, you're not going to recover that cost, because you're going to go. When you start to slide down in your growth, if you start to lose revenue, you start to lose all the foundation of work that keeps your work sustainable. And I call it backsliding. It starts to feel like you're holding on to your fingernails. And I say this from personal experience. Many years ago, I worked for an 8A company, and we were cooking along fairly well, and a couple hundred people. We had, I don't know, there were 8 or 10 of us in the finance and accounting area, and all just cranking away at everything they need to happen. But when one contract, they canceled it. And of the 200 people, we had 20 people on that contract. So that meant 10% of our revenue dropped off immediately. Well, we had to pay out the last of those people, collect the last of the revenue. But what happened is everything shrunk. That shrinking means that our line of credit that was based on our accounts receivable dropped. When that happened, we started being short of cash. When you're short of cash, you start feeling desperate. You can't do anything when you're desperate. And talking to a bank about increasing your line of credit, when they see something like that happen, that's the first thing they call you about and say, hey, you can't, I know that we were giving you this much for payroll. Your payroll's dropped. Maybe you can get through this, but you've got to be able to bridge the gap as a small business inside that area. And you can't recover anything quickly in federal contracting. So I guess I'm just telling a horror story, but I wanted to tell that story to let you know that I want to help people be prepared for the unexpected, but I also want to help you through the process so you know what you should be doing at each stage, not wasting your time, not burning your money, not spending money on things you don't need yet, just because somebody from a big company told you needed it. Because a lot of times you don't need it yet, or you don't need it at all. And they put these requirements on you in a way, in my personal opinion, to try to say, well, you're not a player if you don't have this, so we're just going to move you to the back of the line. It's really just another way for them to filter out who are the outstanding companies versus who are those that are okay. We don't mind having them on our team. They'll be okay, but we're not really investing in them. And what happens? You'll win a contract. You're a sub on a prime, you have a teaming agreement, and you never get the work. Happens all the time, and they know that you can't afford to do anything about it. Now, Josh Frank will have some strategies for that, so don't miss what he and Michael Lejeune will be talking about later, because they have a lot of these answers. My job as the finance person is to give you the information you know, so that you don't lose track of the control over your company. So growth is really where you invested the time and energy in getting on these IDIQs, getting on these different contract vehicles, figuring out what you needed to do with it. And what we need to be able to do is go on to the acceleration stage. So here's the deal. The acceleration stage is where you build on what you did during the growth stage. During that acceleration stage, it's like, oh my gosh, we got on those 4 IDIQs, and it turns out we have task orders on every single one of them, and they're coming in now. At the point where you got acceleration, basically, it's like being graduated in a way. It's like when somebody has been an intern, like my daughter is a clinical psychologist, and she's been in school all this time. She's been doing her internship. She's now in her fellowship. She's now in her postdoc. And in August, she'll be a full-time clinical psychologist at the VA. And it's like all of that work, all of that effort, now she can actually do what she wants to do. She's in acceleration stage because she has every credential she needs to be successful. Same thing happens in government contracting. You've got a reputation. You've got past performance. You've got CPARs. You've got relationships. You've got proven clients and customers. You've got proven subcontractors and teammates. Now what you want to do is really focus on your core competencies. When you started out as a company, you thought you'd be in IT, you thought you'd be doing websites and things like that. Well, you decided that instead you're going to be doing something else. It turns out that most of your work was based on getting 2 or 3 people on a task order at a particular program office, and then they would call you and say, can you get me some more people? Can you get me some more people? And now you were able to win a contract for that group because you had the relationship in the past performance. And now acceleration is where they're going to say, hey, we want you to do more. And now what you can do is you've got the money to invest in, hey, we are really good in this IT area, and we're really good in this systems engineering area that's related to the same aircraft. That is where acceleration can make a difference. Acceleration, where acceleration happens, is that's when those companies that are well prepared can go from 100 companies or 100 people maybe to 200 in a year. So acceleration is where you see that exponential growth. Now, there are times where smaller companies can knock it out of the park and get there earlier. And I've seen it happen many times in the 8A program because they might have 8A set-asides. If that's the case, you've got to be thinking about what you've gotten to do to put in the infrastructure to support that growth. So scale at that point, scalability becomes more important earlier. The reason I'm bringing up all of this 2, 3, and 4, and I'm trying to give you examples in size of headcount, is because it really is going to be a slightly different formula for every company, because it depends on what your customer base is, where they're growing, where you're growing. Are you centered around a geographical location? Are you wanting to go after more than one? Most companies look at footprint. They look at what agencies they want to work with and where those agencies are located. They're looking at where the decision makers for those agencies are. Good example of that is Veterans Administration, the VA, because people might get relationships with a local VA hospital and think that they can expand in the VA, and then they start to realize that the decisions for that are made up in DC, and they'll have to open a DC office, and then it's like an ongoing thing that we have to be able to deal with. So acceleration is really nailing down your core competencies. And when I see people in acceleration, That's where they're going to grow 500 up to 500 or so employees, generally speaking, and be quite diversified. They're going to have all kinds of people in business development. They're going to have division heads and things like that that run it. It's really funny to me whenever I have speakers that I'm bringing together for government contracting, and I say, I'm talking to companies 10 to 100 employees in size, and then the topics we're talking about are important, but they're really geared toward what do you need to do when you're getting ready to graduate from a mid-tier. And that's when we definitely don't want to be looking at, we have different issues at that point. Okay, so number 5 is performance. To me, there are many companies that stay small business as long as they possibly can, because once you're past the small business thing, you're in this full and open deal, which is 6 and 7. Performance means that you've made a conscious decision to say, I want to be the largest small business they're in, and I want to hang there. So by that, what we mean is that you want to find ways to keep your small business work without exceeding the ceilings, whether those ceilings are headcount or revenue under the different NAICS codes. So this is a very important strategy to think about moving forward, because you want to be in a NAICS code that's big enough for you to grow, but you also want to be in a NAICS code that is unique enough that you can get a reputation in it. And all of these things take planning, and you don't really know about it yet, right? So the biggest question with all of this is, where do you want to grow and how do you want to get there? At what point are you going to have to invest in systems? How are you going to afford it? And what resources do you need to make this happen and make it happen the way that you want to? So what I'd love to do is turn everybody on to be a part of the gallery now. And let me figure out how to do that. And Melanie, you know how to do that? Because I'm stuck. Oh, I know. Maybe I could stop sharing my screen. That won't work. Stop share. And remove pin. There it is. And I'm going to change the view to gallery view so I can say hello to everybody. Hey, Doc. I know we've had some strategy sessions this year, and what's been typical of our conversations is we've always had to talk about, if you want to go that direction, here's how to do it. Do you have any insights for the group?
Well, I mean, so I think that you've done a really good job. I mean, you are the Oprah of government contracting, right? So at least with our kind of, and Michael Lejeune hates when I use this word, but our mastermind group or whatever, we've put together a group of different people with different skill sets that can help businesses along that growth model. I love Ginny's growth model. It's one of the most, I'm a business professor turned entrepreneur, so I love business models. And I use that one all the time. I refer people to Ginny's website. And the first question I ask them is, okay, if you had to pick, where do you think you're at in your growth? And then I ask them about 5 or 6 questions to assess whether they're a startup, whether they're a hobby, whether they're a lifestyle company or whatever, so that I can marry the two up and start the coaching, right? So if you want advanced coaching, like how do you spell GovCon? How do you develop a GovCon pipeline? How do you do capture? How do you do all that stuff you hear Mike and Ginny and rap rates and, all that stuff? That's what the rest of the crew is experts on. So once you figure out where you are, you can then determine how large the gap between where you are and where you want to be is. And then you can start planning. There's Russ's expertise on how to get there. So I love just the synchronicity of what you've organized. It's like an orchestra, right? So I'm playing the timpani drum and somebody else is playing the violin, somebody else is playing the tuba, and any instrument by itself may not make the orchestra or the opera, but when you put it all together, it's fantastic. So this is one of my favorite sessions. I watch you do it every year and love it.
Well, thanks a lot, Doc, and I owe you lunch again. So, but I think what we realized is none of us could really help everybody like people don't need financial help, but they don't have any contracts. And that's why Michael Lejeune and Josh Frank are the ones that you have to see. And we had a ton of people on yesterday talking about that. Hey, Stephanie Johnson, what are you thinking? Because you've had great success this year, taking your company. You've got an 8A, you're using your accounting and auditing credentials. You've got some contracts, not just with through the SBA, but also with city and state, I think. Tell them a little bit.
Yes, Jeannie, first of all, I need that slide. I need to put it on my wall right in front of me, and you know what I'm going to do. Go down the line to identify where I am. But yes, I have a contract with working with the state of Missouri and the state of Missouri, the state of Kansas, and a facility in Brooklyn. And it's all COVID related. And I don't know if Jenny mentioned, but we talked about it less than a year ago when we first met. And I was like, there's going to be contracts for this because compliance is necessary. And sure enough,
I'm glad it worked. I'm glad our big plan worked. Hey, I just realized I've only got 3 minutes. Chanel, can I call on you? And because you were on the call yesterday. You're on mute.
Yes. So currently, you know, I'm working with the tech firm, a startup out of Silicon Valley. So we've recently been awarded a Cyber Award, and I'm working with them on their pipeline. So I joined them as an employee, but also, you know, I work with all size businesses, and it seems like everyone, services businesses are looking for partners in tech. There seems to be lots of opportunity coming in emerging tech, virtual reality, blockchain, and AI. So pretty much that's what we've been working on. And for COVID related work, I would say many of the service industry partners and clients that I'm getting, they're starting to go to the lower tier governments that's been awarded through the CARES Act for work.
Yeah. Well, it's going to be changing a lot. So, hey, I gotta stop mine and turn this over to Michael. So thank everybody for being a part of this. And